Okay, well, last week we saw Belshazzar was killed and the kingdom was given over to the Persians. Now we're going to back up and go back into Babylon again. This is what's confusing to some people because they don't understand that some of these are out of order. It wasn't in chronological order, each one of these chapters. So this gives you a feeling of having to adjust and to pay attention real close to the wording of the verses, because we need to understand that sometimes he's talking about another time. Sometimes he's talking about another time. Then sometimes he's talking about both times. The only way you can do this is through deduction. And we need to find out that a lot of this stuff is done out of order, and it's done at different times for different Antichrist figures. So some of it's for the actual Antichrist, some of it is for a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes. We're going to learn about him later. And sometimes it could be for Hitler, because we're going to learn that these sayings that he uses, the words he uses, can be used for many people. It's the spirit of Antichrist, not really the Antichrist of the last days. So he is talking about different people that are coming at different times, and they're all going to look the same. So we're even going to see them come from different countries, because one of them is going to be a little horn on a beast, and the other one's going to be a little horn on a goat. So we're going to understand the goat to be Greece. Well, that little horn is going to be Antiochus Epiphanes, because he's from Greece. Okay? But the beast in the last days is the Roman Empire, and it's so bad that he doesn't even give it a name. He just calls it a beast. So there's going to be 10 horns, and he's going to defeat 3, and there's going to be a little horn that comes up as the 11th horn. All this stuff is going to be hard to follow. So we're going to have to follow it real closely and see who he's talking about when he's talking about it. Okay? We're in for a change now, as chapters 1 through 6 are considered historical, and the last 6 chapters are prophetic. So the first 6 chapters are allegedly just historical accounting of Babylon. Okay? But there are prophecies involved in that of future times. Well, the last one are pure prophetic. They're nothing but prophecy. Okay? I consider chapter 5 as prophetic for the fall of Babylon in Revelation. And also Jesus quoted from Daniel when repeating prophecies in the end times. So we have to understand that even in chapter 5, when we talked about the fall of Babylon, well, there was a physical fall of Babylon. But there's going to be a spiritual fall of Babylon in the last days. So it's really kind of riding the fence between carnal and spiritual, see, in prophetic words. Okay? There was an actual fall of Babylon, and a spiritual fall is coming. We must also remember that these prophecies aren't necessarily in chronological order. This chapter will be about Daniel seeing 4 beasts that are Babylon and Gentile history. This chapter is one of the chapters that is so accurate, skeptics swear Daniel had to have written it after the Greeks took Babylon because it's so accurate. So no one could have seen what's happening this accurate. I mean, he even talks about it being divided up into 4 generals from Greece. Okay, when we get to Greece, it's not yet. This time he's going back from Persia back into Babylon because he waited several years to give this prophecy. Now, if you'll remember, Nebuchadnezzar had the prophecy of the statue. Okay, he just read him what it meant. Daniel hasn't had a vision yet. So he's talking about his first vision here. Chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic because they deal with the times of the Gentiles. So Aramaic is a Gentile language. So he switched from Hebrew to Aramaic and then back to Hebrew. So when he's talking about the Hebrews, he has it in Hebrew. When he's talking about the Gentiles, he has it in Aramaic. We will see that the times of the Gentiles is used in the New Testament to signify the time Daniel is speaking about in chapter 7 between Nebuchadnezzar and the Antichrist. And here's the whole idea. I think it's like 4 or 5 verses. And you're talking all the way from Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the end of time for the Antichrist and he covers it in 4 or 5 verses. So it's quite the prophecy, okay? This is the last section in Aramaic, because after this it will switch back to Israel specific, and Daniel used Hebrew. Chapters 7 and 8 happened between chapters 4 and 5. So 7 and 8 is actually happening back between 4 and 5. He just didn't say anything. He kept his mouth shut and thought about it. And now he's decided, okay, I'm going to reveal the prophecy even though it's at a different time. And chapter 6 happened between chapter 9 and 10 through 12. So Daniel chose the language to use according to what it was about. For me, this just shows how God thinks about the world as it is. So he is telling you that it's significant that Daniel is using Aramaic here and Hebrew over here. He's telling you what it has to do with. God is all about the Hebrews with some Gentile stuff added in. If you look at the Bible, it's all about the Hebrews. It's all about Israel. And people say, well, Israel's cut out. No, they're not. Even to the last battle is going to be between Israel and Gentiles. So it's all about Hebrews, okay? You'll never figure out how God thinks if we don't understand his attitude with Israel. He will gather his remnant together someday, and we better hope that we aren't just extras in his script. This is why I try to get people to understand that we must be adopted into the family of God, because that's who he's going to come after. The rest of them are just going to be burnt up. And people don't understand that. If you ask the general question to a Christian, they'll say, yeah, I'm adopted. Well, adopted into what? They won't even know. They don't understand that they have to become part of the family of God, or spiritual Israel. Otherwise, he's not coming after you. You'll be the part that he's an enemy. You'll be the beasts. Most of the Bible is written through the point of view of God's chosen people. Chapter 7 is a chapter that is written from the point of view of the known Gentile world at the time. So you can see him talking about the Gentile world, and then he switches back to the Hebrews. And we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar thought of gold and silver and majesty and all this stuff when he was talking about the kingdoms of the world. And now we're going to see it from Daniel's point of view, which is God's point of view, and they're beasts. They're all listed as beasts. And God never calls Israel a beast. Even when he's mad at them and they're full of sin, he never calls Israel a beast. Daniel 7:1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and his visions of his head while on his bed. So he's saying, I'm going back now to Belshazzar instead of Cyrus, the king of Persia. Okay. When he wrote down that dream, then he wrote down that dream telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now here's some key words here. I saw. So whenever somebody says, I lifted my eyes, or I saw, or something, they're getting ready to tell you something that you don't know. It's a prophecy. He's looking ahead in time. I saw a vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven. You're going to see the 4 winds of heaven all the way into Revelation. The 4 winds were held back. I suppose they're angels or something, but it's the 4 winds. And of course that word there is ruach in Hebrew. Ruach is wind, okay? Or spirit of heaven. We're stirring up the great sea. Now this is where it gets people all excited about Roman Empire. It was stirring up the great sea. That'll be the Mediterranean. Not necessarily. In a spiritual sense, a sea is the nations. So this could be anywhere on the planet. And the Great Sea would be all the nations of the world. Here we go with more problems with skeptics. Why did Daniel write this history and then skip back to the first year Belshazzar was king? Daniel was through with writing about the Persians and decided to go back to an earlier time to tell of a dream he had years ago that he wrote down. At the time he wrote about Cyrus, he was about 85 years old. And now he is about 67 when he had this dream. Also, Daniel wrote this in the first person for the first time. So normally he writes in the third person, and then Nebuchadnezzar had his own chapter, and now we're seeing he's writing in the first person. The second verse says, the winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. The actual word there is ruach. Ruach can be wind or spirit. There is so much here I'm afraid to interpret. So I went to the Amplified Bible for help. Anytime you get a chance, always compare the verse that you're looking at with other translations, because they'll give you some insight into what other people see. Another translator. This is what's so good about this software, is you can look at different translations with the click of a mouse.
Right.
So this one here, I use the Amplified Bible. Daniel 7:2 says, Daniel said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold the four winds of the heavens, and that's political and social agitations. See, they actually put that in parentheses, so you know that it's political and social agitations were stirring up the great sea, the nations of the world. So they're telling you, my interpretation is correct, that it's the spiritual aspect, not the Mediterranean Sea. They interpret it spiritually, and that's what my opinion is. But many just read over it and don't see what God is telling Daniel. The Spirit of God raised these beasts out of the Gentile sea of people in turmoil. So the world's going to be in a mess, and people are going to be looking for a world leader. And that's where these beasts come from. Many say it was the Mediterranean Sea, but that doesn't fit all of these countries. The four winds are spirits of the supernatural kind. If God wasn't involved in raising these kingdoms, how could he tell Daniel in the future? So God is controlling who is going to be the beasts and who is going to come to power when they come to power, and who is going to knock them out of power when it's all a play. And he knows the end from the beginning, so he is declaring who it's going to be, and he's involved in all of it. Daniel 7:3, and four great beasts come up from the sea, each different from each other. So he's telling you that there's four beasts coming up, and they're all different. They look different, act different. Notice what comes out of the Gentile world's tumult, God calls beasts. Israel is never called a beast, even when they sin. Okay? So it's kind of important when he calls them a beast, you have to know that they are beast-like. They don't have the Holy Spirit. They are not kind. They don't have any pity or compassion or anything. These are bad people.
Demon.
Yeah, demon-possessed people, yeah. Daniel 7:4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made it to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Who got a man's heart? Who was the first beast? Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, we talked about he was given the heart of a beast. Well, when he came out of his beast-like trance in 7 years, he gave him a man's heart. He wasn't a beast anymore because he glorified God and knew who God was. So you really have to look closely at these things to understand God's point of view. You're hearing it from him. He's no longer a beast because he glorified God, saw God, and knew God gave him the power and made him eat grass and then restored him back to his kingdom. He said, there's nothing like our God. He wanted to let everyone know that our God is the God. There's no other gods. All this time, he would just add Jehovah in with the other pantheon of gods. He never gave up his gods until after his beast-like encounter, when he had to eat grass. Since Daniel was starting in Babylon, the first beast is Babylon. If you've ever seen pictures of Babylon's gates, they have lions with wings on them. So if you go look at a picture of Babylon, if you go look at their gates, it's going to have a lion on each side, and they have wings on them. So that's what he sees in his vision. The wings were plucked when it was defeated. Then God made references to a man and says a heart was given to it. For me, in my opinion, this is referring to the transformation of Nebuchadnezzar from a wild beast to a believer. Because when he got out of it, he believed. There was no doubt about it. Daniel 7:5. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said to it thus, arise and devour much flesh. This is the Persian Empire. The bear is going to be the Persian Empire, and it's going to have 3 ribs, and it takes over most of the known world at the time, so it's going to devour much flesh. The second beast was Persia. When Persia took Babylon, it also took two other empires, which made Persia a huge empire. King Xerxes was a king, about 2 or 3 kings from Cyrus, and fielded 2.5 million men. That's unheard of. Back in those days, you fought a whole war with 250,000 men. He had 2.5 million men. Has anybody seen the movie 300? Okay. If you ever see the movie 300, it's not to everybody's taste because there's so much blood in it. But what he did, he went after the Greeks. And when he landed on the Greek shore, there was boats over the horizon, all filled with men. When they got on the land, they covered all the hills with people. There were millions of men on the beach, and the 300 had to fight them off in Greece. So what they wanted to do is there's a place where they funneled them down into a gorge. They killed as many as they could, the 300. So they fought him off for days and days, and he had millions of men. He turned the air black with arrows. So many arrows that they couldn't even, well, they just held their shield up and lived through it. And it's quite the movie. It's a good movie to see. Babylon was added to Egypt and Lydia to make an empire from Macedonia eastward to Scythia. Persia would win battles just by lining their men up on the horizon, and people just gave up. I mean, they could talk all they wanted to about big stuff like we're going to fight them and everything. And they just looked at the horizon and said, we can't do this. So they would just give up. Why lose 100,000 men that day and still give up and lose? So they just waltzed in and took over everything. Daniel 7:6. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. The third beast is Greece. A leopard moves fast, and this one had wings. Okay. Alexander the Great had conquered the world by the age 29, and it is said he lay down on his bed and cried because there was no more kingdoms to conquer in the world. We'll talk about the 4 heads later. Notice dominion was given to it. These men took pride in their fierceness, but didn't realize God gave them the victories. So he's telling them they're going to win in this prophecy hundreds of years before they even fought the war. So the dominion was given to them. God already knows who's going to win. God used these people to synchronize his plans for the earth. In other words, if any of these went out of order, it wouldn't work according to his plan. Because he has all of these countries, kingdoms in mind as he's building his plan for the earth. Daniel 7:7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible. Now he didn't name him a lion or a leopard, or he just said a beast, dreadful and terrible. Exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth and was devouring and breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. This is the Roman Empire. And their idea was that when you went into a place, you burn it down and starve them out. Burn all their food. That's just the way they were. They trampled everything underfoot. They broke everything. See, these other kingdoms said, well, look, I just got all these horses and women and all these businesses, and look at the wares that they have, and we've taken over this, and besides that, they have to have a way to make a living. I don't want to feed them, you know. So we'll just leave everything like it is because we've conquered their army. But the people can go about their business. A lot of them even let them have their religion. They didn't try to change them into their religion unless they wanted to. Well, when Rome got there, you'll believe like we do, or else. Well, one way to look at this is God is telling you things about his character. Yeah. How can we know God unless we read God's word? So he is dictating what Daniel should write, what he should see, how he should write it, wrote it down, and now we can see how God thinks, what he thinks about us. Because we're always think that we're more important, and how I think about God is what I need to figure out. When he is saying, this is the way I think, and you will come to me, you know. Daniel 7:8. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So now what is he doing? He's telling you out of the 4th beast, the Roman Empire, we're going to see a little horn. That's a little kingdom, a little president, a little dictator, a little what. Horns are power. So it's a symbol for president, king, dictator, whatever. So this is a little one. You wouldn't even notice it. The others are big, and when he came to power, he knocked out 3 of them right when he came to power. So he's got your eye now. He's got your ear, because who is this little pipsqueak? And all of a sudden he's running things. And I tell people that a lot of people don't realize that Hitler was a corporal in the army in World War I. He was nobody. And look what he did. So these same verses could be talking about Hitler. We don't know. But we know this is going to be talking about the last Antichrist. And he's going to come up from this nations of people, little known, hardly noticeable, and all of a sudden, boom, he's on the stage, and people know who he is. Mouth speaking pompous words. We're going to see this a lot. He's going to have blasphemy in his mouth. He's going to speak pompous words. You'll notice him. He wants to be noticed. Okay. And the eyes of a man just means that he is a man. He is a man, not a spirit or something like that. Notice this beast has no description as an animal. Daniel just said it was terrible and very strong. This is Rome, and Rome took pride in destruction. The other kingdoms tried to save as much property as possible and use it after the conquest. Rome burned and destroyed the countries that they conquered. These multiple horns are kings or powers, and we will spend more time on them as we go. Notice also that the last beast had iron teeth, no doubt referring to the legs and feet of the metal giant in chapter 2. If y'all remember, iron was mixed with clay in the last, I call it Rome 2. I don't know what else to call it. Rome and then Rome 2 is later. Okay? So the iron just means force. They're not going to ask questions. You will do what they say. This is exactly the order that Nebuchadnezzar's dream saw in his metal giant dream. In Daniel 2, God showed Nebuchadnezzar's man's view of the world. It was powerful, rich, and majestic. In Daniel 7, we see beasts from God's view. They were spiritually decrepit, morally bankrupt, and dangerous, worthy of destruction. See, all of these empires were killed. They were overthrown. Nebuchadnezzar thought it was great and beautiful, and he saw gold and silver, bronze, and things like that. But God sees them as beasts and morally decrepit and need to be overthrown. In case you have a problem with God destroying everything in the people, you can see how God looks at us. If you aren't His, you look like a beast to Him. If Israel is God's children, you can understand why He depicts people trying to kill His children as beasts. See, we need to look at His point of view. These are my chosen people. These are my children. I have been with them since the beginning, and you're trying to kill them. He doesn't like it. So that makes you a beast. If you're not His child, you're in direct conflict with God and worthy of slaughter. All of this history is called the times of the Gentiles. Luke made mention of this period of time in Luke 21. Luke 21, verse 24. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So he is saying until the Antichrist, Jerusalem will be run over by Gentiles. So actually right now, Jerusalem, they say, is in Jewish hands, but it's not. The United Nations actually runs Jerusalem. So most people don't know that. The Jews have a homeland now, Israel, but they can't make decisions in Jerusalem. So that just shows you it's still overrun.
Still time of the Gentiles.
It's still the time of the Gentiles. That was the most incredible thing to me, is all these prophecies are talking about from Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the end times. And the Jews have never had anything. The first prophecy that came true since then was in 1948 when Israel was made a nation. That fulfills Ezekiel 37 of the bones, the Valley of Bones. So he brings them back from the dead and makes them a country. The next thing is the 1967 war, and there's very few things that even make history until we get to the Antichrist. They've got to build a third temple. There's going to be all kinds of things happening, but most of it is not really spoken too much in detail until we get to the end. Daniel defined this time as the time from Nebuchadnezzar till the last king we call the Antichrist. Don't confuse this time with what Paul calls the fullness of the Gentiles, where God is calling out his bride from the Gentiles. Gentiles will have dominion of the earth until Jesus comes to take it back to give to his people. So Gentiles in general will be running the earth until Jesus comes back. Okay. Now the fullness of the Gentiles is calling out his bride. You'll notice there's no talk of a church ever. It's called a mystery in the Old Testament. No one found out about it, I think, until Romans. Paul talked about the church being the mystery, because these people had no idea that there was going to be a Gentile church, and that's the bride of Christ. So whenever you read about a mystery, that's probably going to be it. Think of the bride of Christ first, because these people had never heard of such a thing. You know, they felt like that the bride of Christ would have to be Israel, you know, and no one else. But now we've both been called the Israelites first, and then the Gentiles. I came for Israel first, and then the Gentiles. Yeah. Everyone seems to know about the 10 horns in Daniel's visions, but seems to misunderstand the little horn. The little horn is an 11th horn coming up from amongst the 10 horns. A horn in spiritual language is a king, a kingdom, a president, a leader, or a dictator. There's a little horn in chapter 8 also, and we'll get to that later. So you need to keep in mind there's going to be another little horn coming up later. This little horn will rise to power when he defeats 3 other horns. 3 of them didn't go along with the program, and he explained it to them more clearly, basically. I think there's going to be 10 horns there, and he's going to come to power, and they don't want to go with the program, so he defeats them. He had eyes like a man, so he is a man, and a mouth that speaks pompous words. We need to remember that he is arrogant, as this will occur again later. We will read in Revelation that he spoke blasphemies and was a boaster. His mouth is mentioned several times, so the guy we should look for will blaspheme God and boast of himself over and over. 7:9. I watched till thrones were put in place. We have to understand that the thrones are us. The thrones are for Christians. There's been Isaiah went to heaven. He saw Jesus high and lifted up, but he described the whole thing but never mentioned thrones. Ezekiel went to heaven. He saw God and all of the wheels within a wheel and fire coming out of the throne of God and all this kind of stuff. Never mentioned any thrones. You go to Revelation, you'll see 24 thrones, and there's people in them. That's where we come in. We are the bride of Christ. We've been redeemed. These people in the throne sing the song of the redeemed. We're the only ones that get redeemed, is his church. So this is after the rapture. So when we get to Revelation, I believe in my heart that Revelation 4:1 talks about this is the revelation, and he's in the throne room of God, and he's describing the 24 thrones. And they're all praising God and singing the song of the redeemed. So these thrones were put in place, but they aren't filled with anybody. Okay? And the Ancient of Days, who's the Ancient of Days? Will be God. No beginning and no end. The Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, and its wheels a burning fire. Ezekiel described them as wheels. Wheels within a wheel. So we see the thrones were put in place, but they're empty, and the Ancient of Days is on his throne. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were opened. So we're talking about the very end of time. This is the end of the end. So he's opening up books to judge people, and tens of thousands of people are before him, and tens of thousands of people are ministering to God. So there's a lot of activity going on here. Verse 11. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So the Antichrist is going to be slain and thrown into hell, as in Revelation. So he's just basically going right along with Revelation. And that's why Jesus quoted from Daniel many, many times. He quoted from Daniel. A lot of people say that Daniel didn't write this or he wrote it at the wrong time. Well, then Jesus lied. Because he said from the book of Daniel. He's talking about it. So we know it's true. Verse 12. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So they weren't destroyed like the Antichrist was. And this has me a little confused because I don't know how long it takes for Jesus to take over the earth. I don't know why their kingdoms would keep going for a time and a season. That makes sense. Okay, we've now skipped all the way to the last time of the Gentiles on the earth and see that God is seated on his throne. We run into a slight problem next. The King James Version says the thrones were cast down, and many are led to believe that Daniel was saying the thrones of the 10 horns were cast down. Most of the other translations say the thrones were set in place, or just placed. So this is the time when they set the thrones down. Well, the King James Version translated it as cast down, thrown down. Well, that's not exactly what it said. What it said is they were placed in place. They were taken out of the closet and put into the floor, you know. We have thrones that are listed in Revelation that are filled with elders. These same elders sing the song of the redeemed. The only ones redeemed in Scripture are Christians. Old Testament Scriptures are very careful to keep the mystery of the church a secret until Paul reveals it in Ephesians 3, 1 through 13. You'll see these thrones alluded to, but no one is sitting in them until Revelation 4:4. In my opinion, these thrones represent the raptured church from Revelation 4:1. The books being opened alludes to the time between trumpets and atonement when judgment is meted out. The last beast is slain, and the other beasts are diminished and had their kingdoms taken, but the kingdoms didn't die immediately. Verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And dominion and glory was given him, and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So basically, Jesus is going to be crowned king of everything. This is when he takes possession of the earth and makes his kingdom, and if we look at the Feast of Trumpets, one of the days is called the Coronation of the King. So that's a name. There's like 12 names given to the Feast of Trumpets, and one of them is the Coronation of the King. So we will be in heaven watching Jesus get his crown and become king. So that's why trumpets, we have to be there in trumpets, the Feast of Trumpets. Daniel used the term Son of Man back in the fiery furnace story, and we find it in the New Testament. Jesus himself adopted this phrase to tell you this is what Daniel saw in the vision. So this is the first time that we've ever seen the Son of Man was in the fiery furnace and right here. So he's introducing this term that Jesus will be called the Son of Man as well as the Son of God. This was also a conundrum to all believers on the planet by calling himself the Son of God and the Son of Man. Most believers can explain one or the other, but it's difficult to explain how God could be both. This future kingdom will have no end like the ones we just talked about. It cannot be overthrown or defeated like these man-made kingdoms that fell after a few years. If you remember when Satan offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world in the temptation of Christ, Satan did own them. See, when he was out in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, Satan came to him and said, if you'll bow to me, I'll give you all of this. And he pointed to all the kingdoms of the world. Satan does own the kingdoms here now. But Jesus will own them later. So he basically told him to sit down, shut up. I can't be tempted.
Get behind me.
Yeah. So he was basically telling him that I'm going to get him anyway, you know. So he couldn't be talked into. Just think about it. You wouldn't have to go to the cross. You wouldn't have to have a bribe. You wouldn't have to go to the cross. You wouldn't have to go through all this trouble on the earth if you'll just bow to Satan. And I'll give you the world. You're going to end up with it anyway. That would be a temptation, wouldn't it? But he went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. So he loves us that much. That puts another little cap on it, you know, to show how much Jesus loved us. All he had to do is bow to Satan, pass up the cross, and get all the kingdoms of the world. Satan will later offer these kingdoms to the Antichrist, and he will accept them. We see here where Jesus overthrows the Antichrist and gets dominion of the world. He purchased the whole world with his blood, and now he's taking ownership of what he created. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These are great beasts which are four, and four kings which arise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. These visions troubled Daniel, but the fourth beast was different than the others, and he focused on understanding more about him. Daniel was apparently standing with the others and asked about what is being shown to him. It makes me think Daniel was in heaven in the spirit, like John was in Revelation. Notice it describes the other kingdoms as coming out of the earth. The first explanation was out of the sea. Many Bible teachers make a huge deal out of trying to figure out who the Antichrist is by looking at the Mediterranean Sea for its origin. But for me, the sea is a spiritual and just says he comes out of the Gentile nations in turmoil. My personal opinion is he will come from the old Assyrian Empire, which doesn't border much of the Mediterranean. Now, we could do a whole study on the Assyrian. But whenever you read the Assyrian in the Bible,
it's bad.
We're talking about the Antichrist. So there's a whole long, drawn-out reason why it's the Assyrian, but we can't get into it tonight. But it has a lot to do with Egypt and Persia and Greece, and all these have come about again, but the Assyrian Empire never came back. So the Antichrist is going to come from the old Assyrian Empire, which comes out of the Roman Empire. A lot of people don't realize that the Roman Empire went from Spain all the way around to the Holy Land, and Turkey up here, all the way down into Africa. Well, they forget about the Africa part all the way up into Turkey and everything. But Rome, actually I think it was about the 4th or 5th century, the Caesar at that time, the emperor, went to Constantinople. He went to Byzantine, Byzantium or whatever it is, and he took over Constantinople, and that was the capital of Rome, not Rome. The Roman Empire capital was moved to Constantinople, and it lived for another 1,000 years after the other Rome kind of faded away.
Constantinople is Turkey?
Turkey.
Okay.
Yeah. Gog and Magog. You're going to see a lot of that. And see, Gog and Magog is around Russia and the steppes of Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all these stands up in there.
Turkestan.
Yeah, and it goes down into Turkey, modern day Turkey. So when we look at for the Assyrian Empire, it could be part of Syria, could be part of Iraq, Iran. You have to look it up on a map and see all the area that we're talking about with the Assyrian Empire, which later became the Roman Empire, came in part of the Roman Empire. So when people say the Antichrist is going to come out of Rome, well, yeah, but they don't know where. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on the Mediterranean Sea. It can be inland. You see, so there's all kinds of little things here you have to watch close. But I believe in my heart that the Assyrian is the Antichrist. And one of the types and shadows that convinced me was, if you'll remember back when Joseph was second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. When you go back all the way back to there, he was the one that read his dream and was able to have 7 years of good, bountiful harvest, and then 7 lean years, and he saved the food. So the Pharaoh at that time made Joseph second in command over the whole Egypt, which is the world. Okay? Then you go to Exodus and you read, there was a new Pharaoh that forgot Joseph. And you look it up in different places. It's in the Psalms in different places, and it talks about he was an Assyrian. So apparently Assyria came in and took over Egypt and gave them a new Pharaoh. And all throughout the Bible, Daniel, wherever you read about the Assyrian, that's about the Antichrist. It talks about coming into the land. It said, don't fear him. We'll take care of it. Well, apparently he's going to do a lot of damage, you know. The saints of the Most High receiving the kingdom is just a summary statement about the adopted church receiving an inheritance. Verse 19. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and trampled the residue with its feet. Verse 20. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and at the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. This is a controversial verse, because when Jesus said, this is Peter, and I'm going to build this, I want to build on this rock, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against him. That's the church, his bride, which is going up. He's talking about these are the people left behind, the tribulation saints, and they will be overcome. So if you don't go in the rapture, you will die. This Antichrist is going to go against you and kill you. So that's just what it says. I was watching, and the same horn was making war with the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So everything was going pretty badly until Jesus comes and rescues us. Here again we see the fourth beast attracted Daniel's interest, because it was different than the others. Iron teeth speak of strength, and bronze nails speak of judgment. Rome took pride in destroying people, while Babylon and Persia used what they had conquered for themselves. Persia just appointed a new king and collected taxes to send home. They even allowed their people to keep their religion. Rome would destroy everything and leave any survivors to starve with no home. Daniel said he saw the beast make war against the saints and prevailed against them. This is a key verse, in my opinion, that explains a lot to people that have trouble explaining the rapture. You're going to have people say, well, I'm pre-trib, I'm mid-trib, and I'm post-trib. Okay? You're going to have a pre-trib rapture, and then you're going to die if you aren't taken. So you can call it the rapture of the dead bodies coming up, but if you read the fifth seal, says, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our deaths? He's going to say, a little while longer when the rest of you die. He's basically saying, I got to wait for all the rest of you to get caught and killed. Then we can go against your murderer. Matthew 16:18. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Revelation 13:6. Then he opened his mouth with a blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. We'll be dwelling in heaven by the time we get to Revelation 13. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So you see here, we're in Revelation 13, and he is going to make war with the saints and overcome them. And yet, over here, he's going to be, those who dwell in heaven, he's going to be cursing. So we want to be dwelling in heaven. We don't want to be left on the earth, because he's coming after you. So we now have two verses that say the beast will war with the saints and overcome them, and another verse that says nothing will overcome the saints. We obviously have to rethink our opinion of the rapture and who are these saints that are overcome. So when you start having these arguments about pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib, all of this stuff, you have to understand, yeah, there's going to be a pre-trib and then a mid-trib, at least. And I think probably a post-trib. Anyone that belongs to God is going to end up in heaven. If you have salvation, you're going to end up in heaven. Rapture is another thing. Rapture is going to be those that followed his commandments and loved him. In my opinion, God will choose his bride at the time of the rapture, as he assures us we are not the children of wrath. That's his wrath. That's not the tribulation of the Antichrist. He is going to come after us with both feet. He's going to come after everything we have. But God is not going to punish his own people. But there are many that think they are going in the rapture that won't make it. There will also be people that figure out who this great world leader is and choose to live for Christ. Either way, I call these people tribulation saints. One group won't have to face the Antichrist, and the others will obviously meet the Antichrist. This confusion is where many believers say that the church will rapture out either mid-trib or post-trib. Jesus was speaking of his bride church won't be overcome. But Daniel and John speak of those left behind being persecuted to the death for Christ. Jesus also told us that many will come to him and say, Lord, Lord, and he will tell them, I never knew you, such as the foolish virgins in Matthew 25. This is why I'm so insistent that many people who believe they will be going in the rapture, may not in fact go, but get left behind to suffer and die. Luke 21:36. This is one of my favorite verses to make you think of what's going to happen at the rapture. I think there's going to be judgment. He's going to say, you come, you don't go. You come, you don't come. Okay? Right here. Luke 21:36. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So you have to be counted worthy. It's not going to be just a formula where you confess Jesus as your Savior and walk the aisle. You're going to have to be counted worthy to be called his bride. And the things that come to pass, if you go here, you'll see that he's talking about the tribulation. If you look at the verses right around there. If I told you that there was a ticket that would get you into heaven at the rapture, would you buy it? It's free if you overcome the world's sin nature and watch for the signs of the times of the last days. If you don't get this ticket for free before the rapture, you'll be required to buy it with your shed blood in the tribulation. I mean, I don't know how far you can go if they're looking for you. With the technology they've got now, you're not going to be able to have food and not be able to hunt. You know, every deer is going to be dead within 24 hours. You know, every squirrel will be running for its life. You know, and so I don't have a problem with preppers. But I do know that you can only run so far. And you've got to make it 3.5 years. So it's going to be tough. I don't doubt that there'll be some people make it. You know, there are people that have ways of getting around things. But you're going to have armies, a world army, not just the Texas militia or something. You're going to have worldwide armies looking for Christians and Jews to kill, because that's who they want to kill. This turmoil will continue in the tribulation until the Ancient of Days makes a judgment in favor of the saints, and they will possess the kingdom. We must also think about Israel at this time. Many of the people left behind will be non-believing Jews. I believe that if a Jew comes to the Lord now, as a Messianic Jew, he's with us, he's going. But there's going to be lots of non-believing Jews that are going to be left behind to deal with the Antichrist. And he is going to be anti-Semitic, like no one's ever seen. In fact, they say it's going to be worse then than Hitler. His final solution is going to be the same solution Hitler came up with. Kill all the Jews and the world will be a better place. The only thing is, I think he's coming after Christians also, because we're Judeo-Christians. We're adopted. We've been adopted in. Daniel 7:23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. There's not going to be 1 square inch of the earth you can run to and live peacefully. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to Australia where they can't find me or something. I'm like, yeah, right. I mean, what country in Africa could you run to? What little island could you go to where they wouldn't come after you, you know? Eventually, they're going to find you. The fourth beast will be a different kingdom that is cruel and rules the whole earth. I don't think we can imagine the cruelty that's going to go on at this time. And you're going to have the whole world involved in this. People that used to be Christians will say, well, I'm going to take the mark because I don't want to die. You know, Jesus said you can find your life and lose it, or lose your life and find it. So he's telling you, if you lose your life for me, you're coming with me. But if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. And then he's also telling you, you don't have 3.5 years left, so you're going to get a plague and die and go to hell if you take the mark. That's exactly the verbiage it uses. You will catch a plague and die and go to hell if you take the mark. So really, there's nothing for you to say, but I'm staying with Jesus, you know. But you're going to have people struggling trying to save their own life, and they can't. One way or another, you're going to die for Christ. Verse 24. The 10 horns are the 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. So he's telling you about all these 10 kings are going to be there, and then all of a sudden, the little king is going to come up and take 3 of them out right off the bat. Okay? He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. There's the big mouth again. Shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change the times and the law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. That's 3.5 years. So this is where they get the 3.5 year midpoint thing. I'm not sure how much you're gonna know that it's a bad time from the first seal that's broken. But people aren't going to realize that it's evil in the Antichrist until 3.5 years. Because he's saying, I'm coming after you. I'm going to kill all of you. And they'll say, yeah, that's fine. Come on. So 3.5 years is the key time. If you read the seals, the first one is the Antichrist. I don't know whether he's born or he's revealed.
Yeah.
I think he's revealed. But then you've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So you're going to starve. You're going to be bankrupt.
Yeah.
You got wars and plagues. That's 4 horsemen. People can say, well, it's just bad luck. You know, we had wars forever. We're all starving now because of global warming or whatever reason they want to give it or whatever. But eventually, you're going to get to the point where a man is going to say, kill them all. And he's going to sit on the throne in Jerusalem and say, I am God, and kill a pig, and even the most moronic moron has to know who he is then. You're going to have people that have never heard of Jesus.
Yes.
But you're going to have people that even have a vague idea of who Jesus is. They heard their grandpa talk about him or something. And they're going to say, maybe this is real. And they're going to start figuring out who Jesus is. And they have to figure out, I can't go with this guy, I've got to go with Jesus. Because I'm going to hell otherwise. And I know people that I have seen and talked to. I don't care if I go to hell. Have a good time. I don't want to sit around singing songs. I want to drink and have women and drugs and everything I want. Well, that's not what you're going to have. All right, here again we find the guy with the big mouth persecutes the saints and tries to change the times and the law. I wanted to kind of underline the times and the law. You're going to see that anyone that ever wants to change the calendars, the feast days, or whatever, do away with days, make up their own days, and the law, change the law, God's law doesn't apply anymore, they have the spirit of Antichrist. You're going to see that over and over again. We've seen it when the Catholic Church changed the Sabbath to Sunday. They did away with the Hebrew calendar. We go for the Gregorian calendar now instead of the one the Bible talks about. It's all there. Anyone that comes in, and we're going to see this Antiochus Epiphanes next time. He's going to be a Greek guy that comes in and says, I don't want any of your stupid feast days. You're going to start doing our feast days. And he put up idols in the temple and all kinds of stuff. He went in there and slaughtered a pig on the altar. Said, we're going to do it my way from now on. You guys, and of course the Jews, a lot of the Jews went along with it. They didn't want to die. But the Maccabees fought him and won. Which is kind of a thrilling story to me to read the Maccabees, because you're talking about something about the size of a militia beating the biggest military force in the world at the time. And finally, they had 3 or 4 wars, and he finally decided it cost him too much to stay, so he left. He will defeat the saints for a time and times and a half a time. This equals 3.5 years or 42 months. This is where many people adhere to mid-trib rapture. We find in Revelation 6:9 the souls of those murdered saints crying out to God to avenge their death. This was the 5th seal. That means these saints went through the rise of the Antichrist in the first seal, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in the next 4 seals, and then the persecution of God's people. The times and the law is sort of a mystery. I have to look at it as Daniel might have looked at it as he was a Jew. The times could be the feast days or the Hebrew calendar. The law would have to be the Torah, of course. If this man starts a new worldwide religion to go along with his government, he may draw upon many religions out there now, but outlaw anything Jewish. You're going to notice how he's going to leave out Jewish things, because he doesn't want that. Okay. This has been tried before by Rome and Antiochus Epiphanes and others that hated the Jews. Verse 26, but the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and destroy it forever. The court is us in the thrones. The kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So he's telling you, this is all I have to tell you, but as for me, my thoughts troubled me. Because he got to see all the death and destruction that's coming. It wasn't like a normal battle where you picked up your wounded and dead and went on about your business, you know. This is bad, okay? He said that my countenance changed and I kept the matter to my heart. So he didn't even tell anybody about it at the time he had it. It says the court shall be seated, which for me, this is the 24 elders have been seated, and they will decide the Antichrist is done, and he is the kingdom, and his kingdom is destroyed. We will judge other things also. 1 Corinthians 6:2, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? So we're going to be sitting in these seats judging the world. Do you not know that you shall judge the angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? This dream disturbed Daniel so much he kept it to himself, and it was so terrible it changed him. He said nothing about it from Belshazzar till 17 years later. Next week, chapter 8.